So I've been trying to get into it, explaining value, my conception, my mental model, etc., to the various people in the XRP army as well as the population of my followers. And it's very clear that people are confused, or at least the XRP folks are confused. So let's make it simple and break it down. The reason people buy a financial asset is because they think it is going to go higher. And generally, they have a thesis for why they think it is going to go higher. In the case of Bitcoin, it's straightforward. People buying Bitcoin because they believe that the world needs sound money, that gold, which sort of served this purpose and did serve this purpose for thousands of years, but was broken from sound money starting in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, culminating in 1971 when Nixon broke the gold standard, which has put us since 1971 on a fiat standard where gold went from representing double significant, 50 to 80% of monetary aggregates, depending on how you measured it, down to a low of 6 or 7%. Up now with its recent run to around 15%, but still dramatically smaller than the markets that it's theoretically the denominator for. Yet we're in the digital age. And so the idea of gold, where you have to trust the people who have what they say they have, and that it's not counterfeited, not lead painted with gold, microfilm on top of it. And you have to trust that men with guns will protect it. And you have to trust that the certificate holders have what they say they have, even if it's on a blockchain. The fact is, there's a lot of trust baked into the system that the idea of Bitcoin, which is maintained by a network of node operators that is incredibly large, global, and distributed, so that people know exactly what's going on in the Bitcoin blockchain, that Bitcoin will in fact replace that. It is provably scarce. It is programmatically scarce at the same time. And those are different, right? Both it is going to be scarce, and what the scarcity is at every instant in time. It is transactable digitally, although it is slow. It is methodical, and the Bitcoin network has had an uptime that's unrivaled over its existence. The other thing about Bitcoin that's interesting is you can track the growth of its network, how many exahashes are being online at any point in time, and the averages of such. And if you look at that chart, you see an incredible sustained growth rate. You've seen the kind of chart that makes bulls salivate. Yet the price has deviated recently from that chart. And it's done this a few times in the past, and every single time it has come back. It has deviated on the upside in 17, the end of 17, and in 21 before the collapse. In fact, it went to several standard deviations above it in the previous collapse. But right now, it's comfortably $30,000 or $40,000 below that. And so, yeah, there's upside for Bitcoin to run. And if the chart continues to go up and to the right, you could see it hit an inflection point where it could pass gold. And that would put it at about 10 times where it currently is. That value case is unique to an asset that has no owner. I mean, there's no dominant owner, that was not pre-mined, that is undeniably distributed from the sense of who can. There's no barriers to entry. If you want to run a node, you can. I mean, even I can't quite get it to come in frame. Even I run a small Bitcoin ant miner, a small Bitcoin nerd miner. It doesn't do anything because the odds of a single miner doing anything are slim. But the fact is, there's no barriers to entry to Bitcoin mining from the sense of validation. Of course, there are significant economies of scale required in order to actually succeed in mining blocks. But that is different than every single other crypto. And you could make arguments. The Caspa folks will make arguments about it. XRP folks, Ether, others make arguments, but I don't find them persuasive. I may be wrong. I don't care for the purpose of this conversation. For the purpose of this conversation, we're just going to consider Bitcoin on the side. Now, when it comes to XRP and every other token, your path to value has to be the same as with an equity. It has to be that the network itself that the token represents will earn revenue, and the token holder will one way or another get a piece of that revenue. That it can be by direct profit sharing. It could be by the fact that tokens get burned as revenue is earned. It could be by you need to own it in order to use the network, in which case it's a user fee. But no matter how you want to look at it, there has to be a reason for that. Now, the numbers of potential revenue are potentially massive. There's no question about that. But the one thing I know from history is that when you have a utility, something that's like a commodity that is switchable, that the companies that control the financial system and the ones that will control the financial system can switch from one network to another. If the cost gets prohibitive, it will restrain the cost of that network and therefore the value of those tokens. And so understanding that, my mental model for XRP isn't that it can't be an investable asset. In fact, it could appreciate a couple of times from here easily without violating any of the things that I'm saying. And to me, that makes it a potentially good investment. Now, I'm not saying it's a great investment. I'm not recommending it. I don't care. I decided that it was worth a position, and so I own a position. But what gets me completely crazy are these idiots who talk about this in terms of $10,000 prices or $1,000 prices. Understand the math. Everyone tries to compare XRP to Bitcoin. There are quite literally 5,000 times more XRP tokens than Bitcoin. So if you're going to divide by a Bitcoin price, even to get to equality, you literally have to divide by 5,000. That means, just for simple math, guys, that if you think XRP is going to approach Bitcoin, that $21 is where you're expecting. So understand what that means. If you think it flips Bitcoin, you're saying 21. So those people calling for 1,000 are calling for something that is, quite frankly, on its face absurd and clearly innumerate or can't do math. So yes, I have a problem with all of these people who say that. I also have a problem in the sense of Ripple announcements being equated with XRP. In the early days of Ripple and XRP, they made it very, very clear. The Ripple executive team was out virtually every week at every conference saying Ripple and XRP are not the same thing. One is a token, one represents an operational business. Well, that's still true. The only difference is now that they've decided to get into prime brokerage, which I think is a brilliant move, by the way, that they need the XRP on their balance sheet to be robust because that's what gives them their advantage, the balance sheet. Because prime brokerage, after all, is a financing business where what they do is you use your balance sheet to make profit by providing leverage to your clients on a risk-adjusted basis. And you provide software for them to do so. They bought Hidden Road, they bought custodians, they bought other components. They're building what could be a very interesting business. It's one of the biggest businesses for Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. So there is a lot to be made by Ripple, the operational company. XRP, the ledger, they need it to not go down. They don't need it to go up, although they would like it to go up, obviously. They don't need it to go up. What they need to do is be able to operate their business in a cost-effective manner. So once again, if the price of XRP goes up too much, they're, just like everybody else, going to be forced a little bit to switch. They're not going to subsidize it for very long. Sure, they'll subsidize it for a little while because if the price goes up, it makes their balance sheet that much more impressive. But you need to understand that dynamic in play. That is the bottom line of the analysis. We could talk about it more. I'm happy to do so, happy to get on Spaces and discuss it. But if you want to understand my views, I think I've now presented them reasonably. In any case, here we are with Bitcoin at, back up through 106, XRP at $2.53.5. And things seem to be reasonably solid. We'll see. But I think the liquidity coming from the from the federal government reopening is going to be significant. And we should get a bit of a relief rally here. And then we'll see what the trend is going into year end. In any case, we'll talk to you soon. Take care.